Hey everyone, and welcome to the Joomla Shack conference. I'm delighted to have Ashwin and Parth with us again for a second year. Last year, they told us about some really big and impactful projects they were working on in India. And a year later, they're back to give us specific details on one of those projects, which has really scaled up to 50 million visitors so far. And it's providing a centralized identity and resources platform for people across India. Ashwin, welcome.
Yep. Thank you, Steve. And hello, everybody. Uh, I think it's going to be good afternoon, India, and then probably morning, evening, rest of the world. Thank you, Steve, for having us here. So, hi, I'm Ashwin, co-founder, CTO of Tech Joomla, and also playing a similar role at TechD, which is Tech Joomla's parent company. So, we started TechD almost 14 years now, 14 years back. So initially, of course, small story to it. Initially, we used something called as PHP Nuke. I'm not sure if everybody here has heard about it. We used PHP Nuke to build sites for non-profit causes like saving the hills around Pune, and then that is when we kind of got introduced to Mambo. And then I think what was cool about Mambo is how you could just install a zip file and then suddenly some functionality comes alive. So that is what really kind of glued us to Joomla, first Mambo and then Joomla. And we've been doing a lot of consulting, custom development for Joomla. So our goal is to actually use Joomla not just as CMS, but use it as an application development platform. So one of the projects that we spoke about last year is how we are using Joomla as a backend to build APIs on top of an Angular front end. So so that's the kind of projects that we're doing. We are actually pushing Joomla to its limits by kind of doing things that typically site builders won't kind of get into. A lot of the enterprise use cases is what we are working with Joomla. And we have a lot of clients across the world, US, Europe, India mainly. So in the past few years, we have kind of entered a lot into education and public sector. So those are the two areas that we have we're trying to kind of push Joomla a lot into. So this is Tech Joomla. Tech Joomla we started in 2009 uh, as an extension of our Joomla consulting business. We started Tech Joomla as a extension shop. And since then, we've been doing a lot of extensions, which I'm sure the names are familiar. Shika LMS, JGive, Quick to Cart, JGive, JGive is twice. Sorry about that. JTicketing. Those are the extensions that we have. And two key things I would want to talk about is REST API. REST API extension for Joomla 3.0, 3.x basically. It lets you create APIs for your Joomla site. And we also have something called as a common payment gateway infrastructure, which lets you kind of create e-commerce experiences for in Joomla by using ready-made extensions for a lot of the payment gateways out there. And then we also have a lot of horizontal extensions, basically reusable extensions that are used in a lot of our projects and code. Parth will be doing a session on that right after this one. So that's that. Yeah, so before I jump into UID, I would just probably want to quickly touch base upon the ecosystem here in India and how we are trying to kind of push Joomla in what cases. So it's an interesting technology space to play in India. We have something called as the India Stack. So India Stack is basically a bunch of digital ecosystems that basically enable a lot of innovation. It enables a lot of policy making and implementation of various schemes from the government. So think of India Stack like rails, as in railroad rails, and then there is an entire ecosystem of private sector and public sector organizations trying to build the stations and railway wagons and engines that run on top of this. So India Stack is comprised of, I think, 4 to 5 different elements. One of the elements is obviously Aadhaar, which is the identity program. But I'll also talk about a few so that you have a good context. One more element in this India Stack is something called as UPI. And then I'm sure you'll start kind of acknowledging that UPI is probably one of really powerful financial systems. So what UPI does is that anybody who has a bank account can create an address. It looks like an email address. It is typically your phone number at the rate some provider bank, and that becomes your payment address. And you can use that address to send payments to anybody, And the only verification that you need is a one-time password that you receive on your phone as a text message. You punch that in, and then poof, your money is transferred. So that is probably one of the phenomenal breakthroughs that India has achieved in the last few years. And in terms of transactions, I think I mean it's mostly used for micro transactions, but in terms of numbers, it's doing huge numbers. We're running into millions of dollars being transacted through this platform. That's India Stack. We also have something called as digital locker, which basically lets you store all of your digital documents like your certificates, all of that in a central vault. And then for any purpose where you need to supply your documents, you just kind of point them to your digital locker and they can pick up their documents from there. So it also gives you a trail of who accessed your documents. Then we also have something called as KYC, which basically is used for financial instruments, know your customer. So it's also unique. It's also unique in a way where it can also be used to kind of keep a tab on the financial health or the financial history of somebody. This is now being used by a lot of credit companies to start issuing credit in almost real time. So they could just look at your history of financial transactions and decide what kind of credit they can offer to you. And yeah, and then one of the big ones is this is Aadhaar. Aadhaar is basically the identity program. So essentially, what Aadhaar is that each resident of India receives a unique 12-digit number identifying him, and he basically uses that number to kind of identify that he is the person who he claims he is. And then by attaching this Aadhaar to your bank and to a lot of things, to your phone number, it is possible to identify and start claiming benefits of these various government schemes that we have in India. The other thing that Steve was talking about, I'm sure lot of people probably are curious about the education project. So I'll just maybe take 5 minutes to describe that. So, I mean, this is not part of India Stack, but it is still a huge thing. It's a non-profit called as XStep, who had taken up a goal a few years back to improve the quality of education that is available. And their goal was to reach out to 200 million children and improve the education to them. So we had used Joomla to create a pretty large scale platform for people to create content. They were creating kind of an open source tool, which was a lot like Google Slides to create content. And we had a mobile app to go with it that was used to consume content. And this was an offline first experience. So you download the content first to your mobile the device and you play. And we had used Joomla here to create the web front end, which was used by people to create the content, to collaborate on content, to kind of do an entire review workflow on the content. And we also had a lot of other interesting features there. Basically, word nets for like a thesaurus. We had a community going on where people talked, which people used to discuss about ongoing challenges. That was again one of a large implementations of Joomla. It's still running, just that now the program has gotten so bigger that we migrated the entire stack to be a microservices driven architecture, and it's using a lot many stacks than just PHP now. That's how the program has evolved. All right. So coming back to this topic, which is the UIDAI website. So UIDAI is basically the body. It stands for the Unique Identity Authority of India. So they are the ones who execute this identity program. And the name of the program is called Aadhaar. So Aadhaar in Hindi means foundation. So that's the name of the program that gives the identity to Indian people. So in India, obviously, I mean the language changes every few hundred kilometers. So we speak probably like more than 2 dozen languages in different states of India. So it was important for this site to be multilingual to begin with. So right now we support 18 Indian languages, and just for the want of translators, there's no more languages. But the plan is to actually go ahead and support all the 27 odd languages that are spoken in India. So it's multilingual. So the way this project started is that obviously we went through a proper tendering process, and then we were selected because of our Joomla experience. And the site was already on Joomla. So what I mean, it came to us as simply a project where they wanted another parallel site only for mobile. So they came to us asking for, can you build us m.uida.gov.in? We told them, you know what, we're not in the 80s. Nobody does m dot anymore. Why don't we just go ahead and build a new site? And we'll also take a look at how we have organized your content and kind of improve everything. And at the same time, we will give you a nice responsive theme. that takes care of your mobile problem and then solves everything together. So that is where we started off. And then obviously, since it was government, we wanted to do a lot of innovative things, but then at sometimes, our wings got clipped. So within the confines of what is possible best in government and the pace at which they work, I think we were able to do a pretty decent job with this site. So we started off with user research. So we started off by talking to different people who used the website, and we asked them what they use the website for. And then based on that, we figured out what kind of personas we have. And then we mapped what kind of information architecture we want that would make it easy for these people to navigate the site. So some people who were kind of policymakers came to the site to hunt for information about the Aadhaar and any legislative stuff. A lot of people came to the site to just validate their Aadhaar number, or if they've recently enrolled, they wanted to check the status of their processing. Or the Aadhaar site also lets you check the history of when your Aadhaar number was accessed recently. So, for example, if you're getting a new bank account, the bank would access your Aadhaar profile, so you can actually see a history of all. So we were just kind of putting entire architecture together of how people typically use the platform, and then use that to figure out what kind of information architecture, what kind of UX we want to build. And then based on that, we kind of decided how each page should be laid out, starting with the home page down to the smallest page. And then as part of this exercise, we also worked on some content updates to make the content more infographic driven than textual. Now, as we started moving along the project, the existing site had, I would probably want to call it, uh, not call it a mess, but then it was not architected well from a information architecture perspective. They had used extensions where core Joomla fields could have been easily utilized. So what we realized is that there were almost 8 or 10 extensions that had been created just to be able to upload different kinds of files to each article. So there was one extension that would handle PDF uploads. There was an extension that would handle YouTube links attached to an article. One more extension to handle audio links attached to articles. So we just realized that this was, it wasn't really made that well. And on top of that, they also had extensions where another extension where you could choose what goes on the homepage, what kind of showed up in the latest news. So there was a lot of duplication of content as well. Obviously, everything is there out of the box. You could just mark something as featured in Joomla and use that. But we realized that those kind of fundamental issues were there. So that was an interesting exercise for us. So what we did is that we went ahead and started kind of doing a small surgery, and we were able to consolidate. I'm just going to jump a slide to get you those numbers. So yeah, so we went from 10 plus custom extensions to 0 custom extensions. We were able to just move everything over to Joomla content, and that's it really. We were able to just build a site purely on Joomla content. We do have a bunch of extensions, but they are largely plugins and modules to kind of just fulfill specific layout needs that we had. But in terms of functionality, everything is handled through core Joomla. So here is the goals that we had in mind. So the idea was to reduce time taken to access key information, because the earlier homepage was kind of laid out in a very different way. So now that we are doing it, we took into account what kind of people use it. So we kind of laid it out differently. We were able to ensure that information is brought up at the right time, ensure smooth flow. So this was the third one, was a pretty important criteria. One of the things that the earlier site had was it was also a little heavy. So one of the things was that it works smooth, it works fast, and of course it works across all devices for everybody. Accessibility was one key thing here. So we've heard of WCAG, but then in India they have something called as GIGW, which is basically an extension or kind of a variation of WCAG. But we have something called as GIGW, which is basically the guidelines for Government of India websites for accessibility. So accessibility was kind of a big thing. So ensuring screen readers work, so I'm sure all of you have seen that the technical parts of accessibility are not that hard to really implement. You can easily hook up a screen reader. You can ensure that your tags are semantic. But what we realized is that here the bigger challenge was ensuring that once we hand over the site to them, ensuring that the content that gets updated continues to be GIW compliant. So it was also about training them to ensure that they put images in the right size, they don't distort images, they put the right alt tags to images, those kind of things, ensuring that it does continue to stay compliant. That was one of the key things here. So a few interesting things that we did over here is that basically it was a lot about creating the architecture, creating the categories, creating the menu structure well, so that they have to do the least amount of updates to be able to update the site. So here what we did is that we used, Parth, you can correct me here, but we've used fields for menus, and we used menu fields to be able to create a nice new navigation on the homepage. So some of the homepage, the main content, the module, the body is actually driven by menus and custom fields attached to menus. So that is something that we did, which was like a little different from the usual.
That is correct, Ashwin. In fact, you could probably show the site here so that people can actually get a feel of it. So each of the key landing pages is really just a menu. I mean, the entire main menu and sub menus are rendered as the landing page. So if you look at this example that Ashwin has here, if you actually look at update Aadhaar, and Ashwin, maybe you can hover over my Aadhaar and just show the sub menu there. So if you look at this, get Aadhaar, locate an enrollment center. So now this is rendered, the menu is rendered as a menu. But if you look at the same section, the get Aadhaar section below, as part of the landing page.
So on the screen currently, Aadhaar services is visible. So the third column in the menu, which is Aadhaar services, that's a menu, and it has a bunch of submenus, and that is exactly what is also represented towards the bottom of my screen, where we see the same links, and there's also some additional text that goes with it. This was a pretty cool thing that we kind of went ahead and implemented.
So just to add here, one of the key challenges for them was it needed to be mobile friendly. They had a lot of links. There was no way to get around that. They had a lot of sub applications that people needed to get to. And we wanted to create a way in which they can update things and they don't have to update it in 100 places. So here now updating the landing pages is just about updating menus. And we have some custom fields against the menus, like a menu title and a description. That's the only difference between the menu and the card that you see on the landing page. And the whole idea behind this was try and make sure that there is no duplication on the content update side. Update in one place, it will get reflected in multiple places. Ashwin, over to you.
Yeah, those were the sections on landing pages. Then, since we used only Joomla content, it was interesting to actually create a lot of additional layouts. So, for example, if you see here, so these are YouTube videos that were embedded, the Aadhaar telecast section, and then we have a press release section which has a PDF that gets downloaded. Since we're using Joomla fields, we ended up creating multiple layouts, and we were able to set those layouts at a category level. So the videos category shows a thumbnail with a play button, and then there is a link to play on YouTube. Whereas the press release section actually has the logo of which organization made the press release and then a download button. So like this, we created a lot of different layouts depending upon what kind of content each category has. Those layouts were created. So again, I mean, stretching the custom fields and overall core Joomla to kind of stretching it really well. That's what we were able to do here. So here's a summary that kind of we ended up doing. So like I said before, there were more than 10 extensions, and all of them were close to articles. But then there also the challenge with the extensions was multilingual wasn't really well implemented there, so that added to a complexity. So rather than going ahead and fixing those extensions, we just realized that it is easily possible to migrate all of the data to articles. One interesting anecdote here is while we were doing that, so this page, I'm just go back to the site. So the FAQs, there's a bunch of FAQs that they have. Okay, so now obviously, if you want to implement FAQs, you would probably create a nest of categories, subcategories, and put each FAQ in its own article within the right category. That is how anybody would think and go about it. But what we realized is that in the old implementation, So for example, if I go to this virtual ID page, this page has 9 FAQs. And you know what? They had created virtual ID as one category. And this was all accordions, hand coded HTML within the page. And then that was massively messy. So what our guys did is that they realized that this mess has been created. So they were able to craft a really cool jQuery right there in the console, which took all these accordions and just printed a nice CSV out of it right there in the console. And then we would simply use CSVI to take that CSV and import that back into the right categories. So yeah, all these crafty things were done, and ultimately we were able to get to what we have today, this site. So the other thing that was a challenge is that initially they had 12 different templates. So again, I mean, the templating system was pretty abused. They had templates created for different variations in layouts. So anything that could have been really easily achieved through layouts was actually a new template altogether. So we were able to kind of consolidate all of that into a single template. And mind you, this site also supports Urdu, which is a RTL language. So obviously, the typical challenges for RTL were also dealt with in the template. The next bit was, yeah, we were able to get them from a lot of messy content, hand coding HTML to zero duplication, because we were able to set up the categories in a way that a lot of the sections could automatically be populated. And then obviously the content updates also become simpler because they did not need to update it in so many places. It was just one place where the updates needed to be done. So that's the site. I'll probably switch back to the site and just take you through some of the key pages. So we just looked at the homepage. So homepage like this. So this is our crafty menu. Then we have, so this is also menu with just a different layout. Again, Aadhaar and print is articles, articles, articles. Each, if you see, each of the sliders has a different layout. I think we also managed to create a bunch of contributions back to Joomla. I think especially in the contact section. I think what we realized is that some of the things that are present in articles, I think I don't remember exactly, but it has got to do something with custom fields, I believe. We were able to contribute back also as part of this in the contacts, some improvements in the contacts section. So yeah, so that's the homepage. About, sorry, my Aadhaar pretty much goes to external links. Yeah, and then they have a lot of tenders. They have a lot of tenders. They have questions raised by lawmakers. All of this they have to publish as part of their legislative accountability process. FAQs we just talked about, and then made pretty much a good use of contacts here. So there's a bunch of contacts. Everybody who is beyond above a certain level in the hierarchy, they are all put on the site. So we were able to use contacts really well to make this happen. So that's the contact part. What else? Any key areas, Parth, you want to just go through? Any important pages?
I think all the landing pages are pretty key, and all the layouts. I mean, I think obviously the one of the big negatives that maybe the earlier vendor was working with is that they probably took on this site when fields was not so easily available. Layouts were not there, so they didn't have much of a choice but to make all those extensions. But I think one of the big powerful things in this website has been fields and layouts, which has basically allowed us to use it like a proper CCK and deliver content that is actually different kinds of content in a variety of formats. So I think that probably is one of the keystones of the site, the entire field management
Yeah.
and layouts capability. In terms of, I think key pages, I think Ashwin, you've covered them, but I think what would be really interesting to see is the how it handles scale, and how probably you can also talk about how content from here is pulled into other applications at UIDI using RSS or the APIs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Parth, Ashwin, I've got a question on that. Is this almost like a central repository for the content for the updates, which is then sent to the different apps or different other places where this content can be shared?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you see, so this is uida.gov.in, which is basically the website that has all the content. But if you go to, for example, this is a separate application. But what we have done here, Steve, is that we have given them a way. They can either use the REST APIs or they can use the RSS feeds. And what they do is that because we were able to create really well-defined categories in the FAQs, what they can do is that this is the portal where you can do self-service update of your some of your demographics in your Aadhaar number. So what they've done is that they've basically pulled in the RSS feeds for that particular category and shown here. So this is not a Joomla application. This on the back runs on some Java based application, but they were able to pretty easily use the RSS feeds or API. I'm not sure which one they chose to use, and show the contextual FAQs. So on this one again, so this is again Joomla, but this is not. I mean, there's two different Joomlas at play here. One is the main website, and Resident is another Joomla. But here also they were able to easily use the RSS feed to show contextual information. That's what they did. All the content gets updated here, and different places. Even the mobile app, for example, the mobile app fetches data using RSS feeds and shows contextual help to users of the mobile app. That's how it works. So hope that answered, Steve. Okay.
Yeah, it does. It seems almost as if the fact you're getting 50 million hits on this is maybe not one of the biggest technical challenges. You're having to serve this in 12, 13 different languages, I think.
17 right now, yeah.
17 languages. To a multitude of different devices, to people with probably an incredibly diverse set of devices and probably bandwidth speeds as well. What was probably the biggest technical challenge out of all those things, whether it's languages, whether it's serving people on different devices and different bandwidths, or the traffic? What was the most difficult technical challenge in building a site like this?
So I'll probably come to the infrastructure in a couple of minutes, but I think I would not probably call it as the most technical challenge, but one interesting story. So this, if you look at Twitter and if you search for UIDI Aadhaar, obviously being a social security related program, it has high visibility in the public eye, and anybody who it's up for scrutiny from anybody. And being a young program, being still on its way to maturity, obviously it has its own things. So one of the interesting things is that there is a French security researcher who seems to be finding issues with the security once in a while. So because of that, these people are so paranoid about security. I mean, when the VAPT reports came out, we had to fix, like, I mean, you wouldn't probably fix a lot of those issues. You'd leave them as lows and then just say that it's not worth the time to fix them because they are kind of hypothetical threat vectors. I mean, unless a specific use case can be implemented, it is hard to use that as an exploit. But just because of that, I mean, we had to kind of upgrade jQuery, we had to upgrade, I mean, those kind of things we had to do, which we know is not going to really help. But then, you know what, I mean, it's government and it's so much in the public eye. That was, I wouldn't say that was a challenge, but I mean, when we did it, we realized, we thought of it as, I mean, an unnecessary thing. But then when you look at it in hindsight, obviously these people, the government obviously is, I mean, they're taking a lot of heat there. They are right in their point to kind of go the extra mile when it comes to security. So that, I mean, not a challenge, but that was something pretty cool. We faced a few challenges when we were deploying this. So I will go back to my presentation and talk about.
So just give an example, probably Ashwin, on the security bit. So Steve, I mean, probably everybody knows that Joomla is nowadays maintaining its own version of jQuery. Of course, on the 3x, we are still on jQuery 2.3. But I mean, Bootstrap 2.3, when the jQuery it ships has some vulnerability which Joomla has patched and maintained. And but the version of jQuery publicly still shows as the older version. And though the vulnerability was actually, we still had to upgrade. Though
the number still, so in the file, the number still showed as whatever 3.3.1 or something. And because it showed that number in spite of Joomla having patched it, backported it, we had to kind of upgrade. So those kind of things really. So yeah, so scaling, I mean, let's probably talk about scaling in Joomla in general. So from what we've seen, most sites, most Joomla sites run typically on a normal setup. So most of them actually run on shared hosting. So it's not just one site, but hundreds of sites running on the same server. And I mean, what we've seen is that it's not very straightforward to horizontally scale Joomla. So when I say horizontally scale, vertical scale means that you just keep on increasing the size of your server, put more RAM, put more CPUs, and make it run faster. But the other way is to scale horizontally, meaning that you have your site being served from multiple servers than just one server. So it's a little challenge to horizontally scale Joomla. One reason being that there is some session data that is getting stored to disk. So you need to ensure that when somebody logs in and they navigate away to some other page, the next time the request comes to the server, it is served by the same server in the fleet, not another server. Otherwise, the user will just get locked out. So that is typically addressed by using something called as a sticky sessions in the load balancer. One more challenge that I mean, I have not put this down here, but then one more challenge that we have seen is that across extensions, there is no standard way of storing files, storing uploaded files. So somebody might store it in media, somebody might store it in images. Some extensions might just create a subfolder within their own components folder. Some people might just choose to have their own folder at the top level. There is no kind of congruency in how different extensions store these files, and that makes I mean, not just for this project, but we've seen that challenge happen multiple times. So obviously the most common way is to use images folder or media folder, but then if it's outside that, then you have to keep on discovering what each extension does, and then kind of update your scaling setup to handle that. And worst case is that some extensions actually don't provide a way to override the storage path, and then that makes things really difficult. So those are the few challenges that typically are there in scaling challenges there in Joomla. So some solutions that we have been able to kind of use to come over some of them. One is that because you are now running multiple servers and you need the same code to be running on multiple servers, we use Git to maintain a source code of all the source code, and then we use Jenkins to deploy that source code onto multiple servers that is serving. So that way we at least have the code in sync. What we do is that we typically use NFS mounts. So NFS mounts is like a hard disk that can be attached to multiple servers at a time. So we use an NFS mount that is mounted onto all the servers, and we use some pretty decent caching at the Nginx level to kind of ensure that, I mean, the files are available to all the servers, not just one server. So for example, if you're using a social site and somebody uploads an image into the forum, and if the image gets uploaded only to the one server that the user is connected to, then somebody else who's visiting the site and somebody else whose request is being served by another server will not see the image. He'll see a broken link because that server does not have the image. So NFS takes care of that. Of course, one option was to use S3, but at least in this project, S3 was not an option because they wanted to completely, I mean, have everything in their own data center and not use any external services. But obviously, of course, using S3 is definitely one of the best ways to work around this. But in this case, we had to go for NFS, obviously, because S3 was not an option. One more thing that we typically do is that, so in Joomla, of course, everybody knows about the configuration file and how the configuration file holds database connection credentials. But the other thing is that, well, you can scale horizontally by adding more servers. But if you want to scale your database, then, I mean, scaling databases is a little tricky because one way is to scale them horizontally. But horizontal scaling means that your application needs to know that there could be multiple database nodes that they can pick the data from. And there also needs to be some kind of a load balancer at database level, which kind of pipes the request. So, I mean, that's one option. But the other option that we chose to take here is that we set up MySQL in a typical master slave configuration. But obviously, unless the slave is being used, there is no benefit of this solution. So what we went ahead and did, and this is where one of our horizontal extensions is being used. So we have a reporting engine, we have a reporting tool called as TJ reports. So TJ reports basically allows you to create kind of tabular reports by creating plugins for any reports or any queries that you want to write. And by default, obviously, it works by connecting to the same database that is configured in your Joomla Google configuration. But in TJ reports, it is also possible to provide additional database configurations. And if they are provided, then rather than going to the primary database connection, it actually uses the slave connection. So whatever reporting happens does not really hamper your primary database where maybe some traffic, some transactions are happening. So that is one way where we were able to kind of save. Apart from this, obviously, I mean, I will probably not talk a lot about, but then we in this project we have implemented pretty heavy caching. We have implemented Joomla caching, of course, Joomla page, because this site does not have a login. We were able to implement the page cache plugin. But what we saw is that in spite of having page cache, we were still getting some problems. So yeah, now this comes to a few nice, interesting things that we were able to work on. So I'm going to go back to this home page to tell you what was the challenge and how we solved it. Steve, you asked a few minutes about what were a few challenges. So I think the scaling part and the performance part definitely was a nice challenge. Okay, I don't think they have. It looks like they've removed the audios, but then I'll tell you the problem. So when you put a HTML audio tag, okay, the audio tag basically shows you the duration of the media content, and to show the duration of the media content, it has to actually fetch that content. So if you're showing 5 audios on the home page, then for every user that lands on the home page, there are 5 requests being made by the browser, just so that the user can see the duration of the content. And then we saw that we were being bombarded. I mean, the earlier website did not obviously have the audios on the home page, but when we added the audios on the home page, we saw that the server was being bombarded with requests to MP3 files. And initially, we were not able to figure out. I mean, of course, we knew that people are not playing the audio so much, but then after a little deep diving, we realized that it is not the playback, but the audio tag that is the problem. If you don't kind of tell it to not show the duration, it will do a fetch of the MP3 file to just show the duration. So that was an interesting find. The other thing that we found is that obviously being a site again in the public eye, there is constant bots and malicious traffic hitting the site, a lot of hacking attempts. And I would say 95, maybe even 99% of that is caught at the load balancer level. They have a pretty awesome load balancer setup. So the malicious traffic hitting the website is pretty minimal. But what we realized is that people who found out that this is Joomla just kept on kind of badgering the site with different query strings in the search. So I just use a different search string and keep on. So this was an interesting find. So here obviously we had a lot of different measures to kind of address that. So some of the measures were kind of limiting traffic to the search from the same IP. Again, sometimes this leads to a bad user experience, but then we had to do it. The other thing was to take care of this. We also implemented caching at the Apache layer. So if the same search, so what happens a lot of times, what happens is that some news comes out and people start searching for something on the site, and a lot of the search terms are the same in maybe half a day duration or a 1 day duration. So there the Apache caching actually helps us a lot, because then the search is actually served by Apache and it does not even hit Joomla at those points. So that's another interesting thing that we were able to do to help with the optimization.
So it sounds as if there was a whole variety of different technical challenges for this site. You had the performance at scale, you had the caching, you had the languages, you had scaling it up to reach people across India. Was this probably the most difficult challenge that you guys have undertaken as a team so far?
I think the scaling was, but I think the language, you know what, I mean, I think Joomla has a really nice multilingual setup. So I don't think the language was a big hurdle. Of course, the content was, but then when is content not a hurdle? Obviously, once the content is in, then I think multilingual was more or less good. The scaling, yes, the scaling, and just ensuring that we were able to kind of stick to our original goal of zero extensions, because at some time we realized that maybe, you know what, for example, the homepage that Parth just talked about, we were actually on the verge of creating a component to handle that, because we didn't want to duplicate anything. But then this kind of idea stuck, that we can just use custom fields that are attached to menus and menu items to deal with that. So yeah, I think it was a mix of thought challenges as well as technical challenges on the scale. But I mean, yeah, when we kind of committed ourselves to not having any third-party extensions, and then we were able to ultimately stay true to that.
Steve, I think one of the things about government projects is that a lot of times, I mean, sometimes we have access to things like CDNs and Amazon S3 and things like that. But in this case, I think one of the key challenges was that they were very sure that they wanted to, host everything on their own. They wanted everything on their own servers and did not want to depend on any external services. So typically, some things that we might have done for scaling, for instance, like putting some kind of a CDN in between, we didn't have those options. So we had to kind of work without those tool sets that are usually available. So that was probably an additional challenge to the scaling and stuff like that.
So they weren't willing to run the site through Cloudflare or some other kind of CDN or firewall service?
Yeah.
Okay.
That wasn't an option, at least.
Yeah. So for the firewall, like I said, I mean, their load balancer had a pretty nice firewall. So I think 99% of the malicious traffic is blocked there. I mean, they did have a solution for that, but CDN definitely was not an option. In fact, those of you who are interested in the technical details of the topology, this is what we have. There's two different data centers, and then there's a single load balancer that balances load between each of them. And within each data center, we obviously have one more router which routes traffic to a particular server. So in this project particularly, the sticky sessions isn't a problem because there is no login happening. So it doesn't matter if my first request hits a different server than the previous request. But obviously, at least 1 petabyte of PDFs and audio files and images that we have, and to kind of ensure that we don't need to copy them all over, we use the NFS, and there is one NFS in each of the data centers, and the NFS is mounted on top of all the web servers, and the NFS itself is kind of, so we load the files only on data center 1, and then they're rsync to data center 2 using a periodic rsync. So that's the technical setup that we have. So there's 6 servers right now. So in fact, that's one more improvement we did. So earlier the site needed 8 servers just to handle regular traffic, but we were able to actually bring that down to 4 servers. And the 2 additional servers are just to kind of there to ensure that during peak traffic, the site does not go down. So we were able to actually half the number of servers than the previous implementation.
Wow. Thank you so much, Ashwin. And thanks, Parth, too, for an insight into a project this size, and also done in a slightly unusual way for a government project with the government restrictions and the government requirements on top of it. That was really fascinating.